people were really excited with Biden coming in. They think, oh, he's going to be the opposite of Trump on immigration. Trump was so nativist, xenophobic, anti-Muslim, anti-Latino, really. He said Mexican, but as Latinos, we know that when you say Mexican, you mean all Latinos. But that isn't the case, right? There isn't. It's kind of you're sounding the alarm, saying, "Well, hold your horses. Do you know who this guy is? Do you know who he's in bed with? Do you know who funds his campaigns?" So tell me, give us a little summary, and then we'll dive into it. But give us a little summary of what you wrote about in Biden's border.
Yeah, sure. First, it's great to be. It's an honor to be here on the podcast with you.
Oh, thank you.
I'm really happy to be having this conversation. And yes, I co-authored a report called More Than a Wall, and it was released in September of 2019. And the More Than a Wall report really did a deep dive into what you could call the border industrial complex. So looking at some key companies that are involved in the border industry. And by that, I mean companies that are getting contracts from Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. And just looking at those companies, looking at how those companies are also financing certain campaigns, key congressional committee members, or in the House or the Senate, the House Homeland Security or Senate Homeland Security, or appropriations. Appropriations, of course, is a committee that determines the budgets each year, like the Department of Homeland Security budget, and also looking at how these companies are lobbying during certain times,
right?
Especially when budgets are being doled out, or when immigration reform is on the table. Like right now, I bet if we were to look in this exact moment, we'd see a number of companies. And so, coming from More Than a Wall, in the presidential election, in the campaign last year in 2020, we started looking at. We thought, well, let's look at campaign contributions to the presidential candidates and see what's going on there. So we took 13 companies that we focused on in More Than a Wall, but we actually switched it around a little bit to update it. And we looked at those 13 companies. Those 13 companies range from, tech companies, big military companies like Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman. These companies are getting big border contracts, to like private prison companies like Geo Group or CoreCivic. A whole host of different companies.
And CoreCivic, in case anybody forgets, is Corrections Corporation of America, and they really just rebanded their name because, what was it, like a few years ago, that name was everywhere, right? Corrections Corporation of America, and it was getting a lot of bad press, and they just decided to change their name, but they're still the largest private prison company in the world, right?
Yeah, that is correct. They run neck and neck with Geo Group. They're always fighting for number one. But yeah, CCA. It's kind of like Blackwater. You know how many times Blackwater, the mercenary, privatized mercenary, right. They've changed their name so many times. The last version of their name was something like XZ17-8 or something. I don't know if that was it, but they changed their name so much, and I think for exactly what you're alluding to, that you change your name and then you just lose the kind of negative response. But anyhow, CoreCivic, formerly CCA, was one of the companies. So we looked at these 13 companies, and the 13 companies, we started crunching numbers. We started just tallying how they were spending their campaign contributions. And it became apparent really quickly that Joe Biden was getting the majority of them. In fact, at more of a 3-to-1 ratio to Donald Trump, which was a surprising finding. We actually were going to release the report in September, but we actually decided against doing that. We thought, well, the polls are showing that Biden is probably going to win. We didn't, of course, who is a no at that point?
I thought he was going to lose. I had predicted that Trump was going to win in 2016, and I thought I saw the excitement for Trump, and I didn't see the excitement for Biden. So I thought, okay, well, it's going to be a repeat.
Yeah. So I guess Trump could have won. He got 74 million votes. Yeah. So there you have it. But we decided that it might be more powerful to release it after if Biden wins, just to show that the border industry is definitely bending towards a Biden campaign. And what essentially that means is that when you look at the border companies, the border industry, and can I give you just one stat of like the scope of it? So there's been 55,000 contracts that have been given out by CBP and ICE between 2008 and 2020. And that's like worth $55 billion. And that $55 billion is the same as the collective amount of border and immigration enforcement budgets from 1975 to 2003, which amount to $52 billion. So that just goes to show like how massively the budgets have increased, but how much of these budgets are being funneled into this private industry.
And 55% of that 55 billion, 55% of it has gone to Democrats, right?
Yeah, when you look at the campaign, when you look at the companies, the key companies that we're looking at, and then you look at the the cumulative campaign contributions they made in the 2020 election, 55% of that, it turned out to be like around 40 million, but 55% of that went to Democrats.
Right.
And so it's like, I look at it like we go out, we go out to vote and we vote for this person or that person. But when a big, powerful company that already has access to the behind the doors meetings and with key congressional members, they're actually voting for both, right? They vote for both people. And that's exactly what we saw, except it was so evident that they judging, like looking at the 55% of the Democrats, looking at the 3-to-1 ratio to Biden to Trump, that it was bending this industry, a powerful part of what shapes policy and strategy on the border and immigration enforcement was bending towards the Democrats.
Except for Geo Group and CoreCivic, the detention companies who leaned very heavily towards Republican, right? Because they know that Biden's not going to be enforcing and locking up as many. Well, we thought he wasn't. I think there's more kids in detention now than there was under Trump. So you show that they're so cynical, right? Like, so in 2018, when there's an incumbent president, they're giving all their money to the Republicans, right? But it's only during a toss-up elections, right, a presidential election, that they hedge their bets. But if the whatever incumbent party is in the office, they give heavily to that party, and then it's only on presidential elections that they hedge their bets. Cynical. Yeah,
it's amazing. It's actually quite brilliant on their part if you think about it. Like they don't lose. You don't lose. Like you win.
It's literally an investment in their own business, right? Through politics. Like I was just reading, the corporation profiles, the corporate profiles, and I just wanted to read what CoreCivic said. It's in more than a wall from the 2019 report. They said the demand for our facilities and services could be adversely affected by the relaxation of enforcement efforts, leniency in conviction and sentencing practices, or through the decriminalization of certain activities that are currently prescribed by our criminal laws. Meaning, that's why they invest in the Republicans, right? Because they know that the Republicans are for enforcement. They're the law and order. Law and order. I just got finished reading Stamped from the Beginning, Ibram X. Kendi's book on the history of racist ideas in the United States. And he talks about how, and this has been said a million times, right? Law and order really is a code for, securing white supremacy, the white supremacist order. It means cracking down on black and brown people. And law and order ties into this border security thing, right? Where, I was reading Deloitte's rationalization for giving, and they said, oh, no, we're stopping terrorists. We're stopping human trafficking, stopping human smuggling. But we know that that's not what the border security mostly hurts innocent people, right? Asylum seekers, people who have nothing. They don't know. They're not terrorists or any criminals at all. They just want to work hard. That's who it really hurts. But it's hidden behind this law and order, homeland security charade, a facade, right?
Yeah, there's a huge facade, smoke screen, and it's all and it's all put in that sort of rhetoric, the like customs and border protection,
right.
Protection, protecting who, what, right. And you start to think about it. Well, you look at the strategy on the border, and it's prevention through deterrence, which means that it's anything but protection. It's making things unsafe for people. It's making things dangerous for people. It's making things deadly for people. So it's customs and border protection. That's not what you're doing. Or for people that live in the borderlands, right? That have to go through checkpoints anytime they go to the grocery store, or they go to the doctor's office, or they go to school, or the kids have to go in their school bus through a Homeland Security checkpoint to get to school. It's like nobody's saying they feel protected. They feel like less safe. But yet you have this like rhetoric, like you say, that just smoke screens everything. It's just protection. We're protecting you. We're protecting. And it's a remarkable, because you have things that are just killing people, like for example, the poison water in Flint is one prominent example. Like people are drinking like leaded water that's adverse to their health, makes them less secure. And then you're constantly told that there's a protection to somebody on the other side of a line that's coming to take something that you're pouring literally billions and billions of dollars into, while neglecting so much else. So it's just a smoke screen. And then you don't focus on the correct problems. The correct questions are not being asked. And then and then you end up with this, like Eduardo Galeano's book, the upside down world where protection is really not protection, and right. Security is really insecurity, and that sort of thing.
I always say, like, Orwell was right, man. He has no idea how right he would be, that everything would become its opposite, right? Tyranny is freedom, right? We have to give up our freedoms to protect our freedom, right? How does that make sense? And in Empire of Borders, and you talk about this we were just talking about, you were on Factually, the podcast with Adam what's his name? Adam
Conover, yeah.
Conover. And you were talking about how you said that, I picked up on a key phrase there. You said that the border is a proving ground for the weaponization, for the security apparatus, right? And so the way and I think Orwell said this, speaking of Orwell, that the way, people were so shocked by what happened in Nazi Germany, right? How can this civilized country do this to, its own citizens, right? And Orwell said, no, well, Europe's been doing this to Africa for decades, and they were just practicing over there. Like he said, he has this line where, like, he says, colonialism is a nation practicing on another people what they're eventually going to do to their own people. And you see that with the border, right? You see that, they're have the security apparatus and treating migrants a certain way. And then, like you said in that podcast, then they move it to Portland, right? And they're treating these protesters as if they're undocumented people crossing the border because they've practiced it already. Or like how you mentioned how there's a border checkpoint going from El Paso to Las Cruces. And I've hit that. I have family in El Paso, and I've hit that checkpoint. And you're like nowhere near the border. I feel, I was in Mexico, but I think I was like 45 minutes, an hour out of Mexico. And then you hit this checkpoint. And as an American, one, you're like, this is weird. And two, and you mentioned this too in the podcast, what if you're not white and your name, no offense, is not Todd Miller? What if your name is Hector Luis Alamo? And you're automatically exactly the kind. And I look swarthy, right? I'm a dark Latino, and I might look exactly how they think a narco might look, right? Especially if I'm driving the car that I drive. They're like, where does this guy have this money? You know, he's young, he's a narco, right? And you called it checkpoint trauma, right? Checkpoint trauma. Mm-hmm. I've had that, right? You're driving along, you're enjoying the scenery, the desert, it's beautiful, and all of a sudden you see a checkpoint. And reading all these books about what Border Patrol does, you know, calling people tonks by the sound that their flashlights make when hitting a migrant on the skull. They call them tonks. Am I a tonk to them? You know, and I'm automatically nervous, right? You said that, you know, they do profiling as if they look for things like do they have one key on their keychain, if they have both hands on the steering wheel. So when you said both hands on the steering wheel, is that a telltale sign that I'm a suspect, or what should I do with my hands at a checkpoint? I'm an American. What should I do with my hands in my car at a checkpoint?
I mean, exactly. I know this too. Once I heard a Border Patrol agent say that, you know, go down the list of things they look for, and one of the things was the two hands on the steering wheel. Now, every time I come to a Border Patrol checkpoint, I always find myself putting the two hands up. It's interesting because it comes, you know, like the whole idea of, you know, they're looking for something, but like looking for something for somebody being nervous. And if somebody's being nervous, maybe that's what you do, or you do something that, you know, that would then strike their, you know, they do this quick visual inspection, and then they decide, you know, do they send this person to secondary inspection or not? And it is. I mean, and what you say is absolutely correct. And it, you know, they've actually said this on record that they, in fact, I can almost directly quote what a Homeland Security official said about racial profiling, and they said, we need to, I can't remember it exactly, but something like ethnically profile in order to do our jobs. They said that in order to do our jobs part of it. And this is in a New York Times article when the Obama administration was going to different departments and trying to like extract racial profiling. And they came to the Department of Homeland Security and they said, no, we can't do that. We need that as part of our jobs. And then all the reports about checkpoints show that that's indeed what they're doing. The people that get sent to secondary inspection are usually people of color, brown people normally, people with Latino names like yours. And it's definitely being used. It's definitely a part so not only are they looking at, you know, how you're gripping the steering wheel, they're looking at the color of your skin. They're looking at your name. They're looking at a number of things like that. They're listening to how you talk. They're listening to for an accent, you know, those sorts of things. So it's definitely it's institutionalized racism right in front of our faces.
Yeah. I mean, I live in Vegas, and I take visitors to the Hoover Dam because it's 25 minutes away, and it's the same thing there. There's a checkpoint, and it's not border, but they're doing the same thing. They're looking for terrorists, right? And I'll pull up, I'm driving, and all they do is look at everybody's face in the car. And then by that, they're gauging, is this person a threat? But what about a person's face makes them a threat or not? It's clearly race, right? It's clearly whatever image of a terrorist you have in your mind. Never mind, you know, we can say that, you know, with what happened in Atlanta and what the FBI has been saying about white nationalist violence, we have to change our definition of what terrorism in America looks like. And maybe law enforcement is slow on the uptake on that, and they're not willing to get rid of I'm looking for Osama bin Laden, or I'm looking for El Chapo.
Yeah, it's definitely like what they're doing. They have these, you know, racialized models that they look for, and then that's how they determine whether you go further into their custody or not, or you get interrogated. And the checkpoint trauma thing is, I have a friend like from the Tohono O'odham Nation, which is another friend of mine is the person who, Amy Juan, is her name. She coined, at least she's the first person I heard use that term exactly like it was, checkpoint trauma, describing what was going on in the Tohono O'odham Nation. And the Tohono O'odham Nation is, for people that don't know, it's in southern Arizona.
Right.
The people traditionally lived on both sides of the border. The border, when the surveyors came after the Gadsden Purchase in 1853, no consultation of the O'odham at all, and they just drew this borderline. And so it's been like a people divided by the border since then, really. And since 9/11, when you see this just upsurge of Homeland Security budgets, checkpoints going everywhere, technologies going everywhere, more border walls, more Border Patrol agents, the Border Patrol began to swarm into the Tohono O'odham Nation, and then they put checkpoints on every single paved road going out of the reservation. And so you can't leave without going through a Homeland Security checkpoint. And on top of that, they were targeting people on the Tohono O'odham Nation, like on this kind of accusing people of being drug smugglers, right? That was the main thing. Well,
that's the Devil's Highway, right? The Devil's Highway runs through the O'odham Nation, which is, where a lot of the deaths, was it 8,000 since the 90s, right? Something like that. Yeah. And it's probably 3 times that many, right? Because I know Jason DeLeon, anthropologist at UCLA, I believe, he studies the remains of migrants found, and he's shown that a body can disappear completely. The desert takes it, right? The animals, the conditions. The desert takes your remains in as little as a week. There's no trace of you. So the 8,000 is really what they found. But, there's still thousands of people in Bolivia, in Peru, in Honduras, looking for their families. Their family, their brother, their mom went up north a few years ago, and they haven't heard any word. And the desert took them.
Yeah, I highly recommend Jason DeLeon's book, The Land of Open Graves.
He was on the show, too.
Oh, yeah. Really, yeah, as everyone knows, he just details the prevention through deterrence strategy and how it purposely funnels people into these areas where they're at risk of death. And that's exactly 8,000 people have been found. Bodies have been found, and De Leon and others, No More Deaths, the humanitarian aid organization that's based out of Tucson, they just came out with a report that also makes the claim that they think that 3 to 10 times more bodies or people are probably in the, either, like you said, the remains might not even exist anymore, or that sometimes the bones will remain. So 3 to 10 times more. So what if it's 10 times more, right?
Right.
If that's correct, 10 times more, it's 8,000. You're looking at 80,000, right? 80,000 would be. So yeah, you're looking,
and that's the prevention through deterrence policy and that brings up Biden, because that's his policy, right? And speaking of Tucson, I mean, we got to give a shout out to Ellen. She has that documentary, The Second Cooler, which talks about, because a lot of the bodies, when they're found in the desert on the Devil's Highway, they're taken to Tucson, the Tucson coroner's office, and they had so many bodies that they had to have a second cooler. And so she has the documentary film, The Second Cooler. Jason did that great experiment, which nobody had done before him, having a pig carcass, dressing it up, and leaving it in the desert, and seeing how long a body like that decomposes and is erased. Nobody had done that until he did it. So it's like there's people dying on the border and nobody cares because they're not American, I guess, because they're brown, maybe. I don't know. Maybe a little bit of both. But it's strange that so many people could be dying right here on our border, dying, and nobody cares.
It's truly baffling. So like a thought experiment would be like, what if there were 8,000 French people who would there be another response to this?
Right.
Like I mean, we're talking about like a humanitarian catastrophe.
Right.
Of what
well, I mean, you heard that summer when boats were capsizing in the Mediterranean. That was all over the news, the whole summer, right? Oh my God, the kid washed up on the shore, right, trying to make it to Italy. The same thing's happening every year since the 90s on a massive scale right here in Arizona, and nothing.
Yeah, it's true. There's the coverage of it is so it's gone at first when in the early 2000s there started to be reports of bodies being found in the desert. There was some national media attention. That's when there's different humanitarian aid organizations that started to form, like Humane Borders, to put out water. No Mordessa, I just mentioned, to like provide clinics for people, Samaritans, people that would like go around looking for people in distress. There was a sort of like a little bit of press on The Devil's Highway. Actually, you mentioned that, the Luis Urrea
book.
Yeah, it's a great book on that details that brought some attention to it. But it happens year after year. Like right now, we're in March, and you can predict that. Last year, I think more than 200 or maybe more than 300 people died in just Arizona, or I should say the remains were found. You can predict that people that are perfectly healthy right now are going to die in the hundreds, maybe over 1,000, since we don't know like if remains disappear, are going to die right now. You can predict it. The strategy is still in place. It does the same thing. It funnels people in the desert. The whole strategy of death is in place. It's been in place year after year. So you can say it's a premeditated murder, and that's what it is. And nobody's going to cover it, right? Nobody's going to run to the border and cover it.
The border policy, it's like because they build a wall in El Paso, they build a wall in San Diego, they build a wall where it would be easy and safe for people to pass, but they don't build a wall in the hottest, most treacherous part. So it's kind of like having this giant bear trap, and people keep getting mangled and die in it, and you're like, hey, we're not forcing anybody there. You're trying to come to the border. And the other thing is what those books show is that these people, they're coming from Bolivia or whatever, and they'll make it all the way to Mexico, and just to make it to the border is treacherous, right? People die on the way, right? Narcos and rapes and all this stuff, right? Oscar Martinez, great journalist in El Salvador, has covered that too.
Mm-hmm.
The Beast, right? La Bestia.
It was a great book. Book.
And they make it to the border, and they're like, oh, home sweet home. We just got to walk across this little desert. They've never seen a desert. They have no idea. They show up like in sweaters. They show up in like, they don't have no idea what they're in store for. They have like a day's worth of snacks. But that's, so what I wanted to talk to you about is that's Biden's policy, right? Biden, he's against Trump's wall, even though he's not tearing it down. He's against Trump's physical wall, but he's very for a wall. He's for a technological wall. And what you show is that there's more money in that technological wall. There's more money to be in contracts in that technological wall than in some, measly physical wall.
It's you could quote Biden, or I guess I'm not so great at like remembering quotes exactly. So
yeah, me neither.
So Biden said, "I'm not going to build another foot of wall." So you have that strong like statement that's going to be really appealing to the public, right? It's like, oh yes, we have somebody standing up to Trump. And then the next clause of the sentence, he says, instead we're going to divert this to, and then you want him to say like healthcare or
education,
anything. But then
bridges.
He says to bridges, whatever, But then he says technology, and technology, and it's like, oh, I see what you're doing. It's you're making the wall itself. It's this big, bad, ugly wall, right? Trump, it's associated with Trump. It is, of course. And then you appeal to people, but then you make the technology sound innocuous or even humane, right? Oh, we're going to take a more humane approach, and it isn't. Like the wall and like the way that the border functions, the border technology is a part of the wall. It's like they call it a smart wall, a smart border, a border wall system, and a border wall system has a border wall, and then it has armed agents that are looking at the wall, and then it has and patrolling everywhere else too, and then it has technologies, and technologies are part of this whole apparatus that's in the prevention through deterrence strategy, which is meant to force people into more desolate, dangerous, deadly places, like we were just discussing. And so so when Biden says that, and he's basically saying, "I'm going to keep building the wall."
Right,
That's
basically
what I hear, right?
Yeah, no, yeah.
I'm going to keep building the wall, and contractors, I presume they gave him a lot of campaign contributions. What they're thinking is that we're going to get money for this, and when you're talking about the technologies, they would go back to Orwell. They make probably Orwell spin in the grave 100,000 times, right? Because you're talking about like cameras that can see 7 miles away, night vision cameras, thermal energy, ground sweeping radar that has a 13-mile radius, drones equipped with Vader, like Darth Vader radar system.
These are the Predator B drones that are used in Afghanistan, right?
Exactly, yeah. Like to bring the quote unquote battlefield to the border, as a vendor put it to me. You know, this is what this is. It's turning, like, the wall becomes all these like artificial eyes that then stream into these command and control centers. They're treating it like a war zone. And you go into these, you see these control centers and these agents, a National Guard. Remember how Trump deployed the National Guard in like 2007, 18, I think it was? They're still there. Like, there was press about it at first, but then they never left. They're still there. So they're in these control rooms looking at, you know, all these cameras from all these different camera systems, and more than 12,000 motion sensors that are implanted. People can't see them, but trip them all the time. They set off alarms in the control centers. The cameras go on in the drones. They have the helicopters, the fixed-wing aircraft. You know, it gets more and more, and they want to put like facial recognition technology on drones, medium-sized drones now, so they can fly down and take people's pictures. So this sort of biometrics, facial recognition, iris recognition, their new system that Homeland Security is implementing is called HART. It's Homeland Advanced Technology Recognition.
You see what they name things too? HART?
Yeah. HART.
For a heartless system. For a heartless system.
Heartless system. But even like the capabilities of this new system is not only all these biometric modalities, as they call it, but it's also like your relationships. They like, oh, you were at this meeting, and this goes into your record, or so like GPS coordinates of different locations where you've been. So all this stuff. So when Biden says I'm going for technology, this is what he means. He's talking about this whole apparatus of technological part of it that you could read 1984 and read about it, right? And that's what is happening. And so that's. And
then you know, if people. Everybody seems to agree that the border, I don't. I mean, yes, do we have to stop terrorism? Yeah, but I don't think we have to heavily militarize our border to do that, or with technology or anything like that. I mean, I think there's just, you know, I don't think there's ever been a terrorist caught at the border.
No.
But like you said in that podcast too, that, you know, they were flying the same. This is CBP. Customs and Border Protection, flying drones over Minneapolis. You know, so again, what they're, you know, anybody listening, watching, who thinks that, oh, this is just at the border and great, it's getting more technologically advanced. Oh, great, they're going to hear that you said, oh, there's drones that can swoop down and take a migrant's facial recognition. They think only a migrant. No, those drones are going to be over Chicago, New York, LA, eventually, all in the name of law and order and keeping us safe, Homeland Security, all these Orwellian terms, right? Mm-hmm. And it's, I mean, so is there any hope? Like, I have friends, family who, you know, they're waiting on visa applications. My wife fixed her papers in the Obama years. It was super quick. And then we were fixing people's papers in the Trump years, and DHS was dragging its feet, and it's still dragging its feet. And so what is the immigration policy of Biden look like? People are always celebrating what the House does, what the House of Representatives does. Oh, they're passed this great immigration bill. They're going to give migrant workers these rights. I'm like, that's the House of Representatives, sweetheart. Like, bills, you know, the Senate is where progressive bills go to die a quick and ugly death, right? Especially this Senate. And so, and, you know, there was talk before the Georgia runoffs, because Biden's a veteran of the Senate, that he didn't really want Democratic control of the Senate. He wanted Republican control, or at least a stalemate like we have now, so that he can offer these progressive proposals, knowing that the Republicans in the Senate are going to block him. And then he goes, look, I'm sorry, I can't. The Republicans are blocking me, but it would have been nice, right? But he knows that. He's been in the Senate since the 70s. So what is, you know, we hear a lot what he talks a good talk on immigration, but what do you expect out of him?
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, you see, you know, he came out of the gate running, really,
Yeah.
you know, identifying the Trumpian policies that, you know, he's going to reverse, like the Remain in Mexico. I think it's in a review, but like that sort of thing that where people seeking asylum get put on the Mexican side of the border to wait. So Biden says, well, we're going to, you know, I think he said we're going to eliminate it, but it's actually in a review process right now. That separate, you know, families that were separated, that, you know, during the Trump administration, that Biden would, the Biden administration would bring them together. And
he got rid of the Muslim ban. He stopped building the wall.
Yeah.
But these are all executive orders too, right? We know what happens with executive orders. If Trump runs in 2024 and wins, or somebody worse than Trump, which is very likely, because Trump gave the blueprint for some really diabolical character to come along,
right,
and really exploit, right? So, I mean, executive orders are great, right? DACA, I believe, was started as an executive order, right? But as far as policy, as far as laws,
as far as like law and policy, really, what Biden is bringing to the table, and even with, I mean, you have to see the immigration reform bills that will be brought to the table. But what he's working on is what's been the system that's been going on for decades now, and that's really at the border. It's the prevention through deterrence. So, like we all discussed, he's not going to remove. Like he says, I won't build another foot of wall, but he's not going to remove the Trump wall, the 400 miles of wall that Trump built, nor is he going to remove the wall that he voted for in 2006. He voted for the Secure Fence Act that before even Trump took office, there were 650 miles of walls and barriers that Biden voted for. So that stuff is not going to be, so that whole thing of funneling people in the desert, the whole strategy of deterrence, not only funneling people in the desert, but what Border Patrol calls the consequence delivery system. Ooh. So if you get arrested, if you get arrested by Border Patrol, you face a judge, like an Operation Streamline, for example. You're shackled in your wrists, around your waist, around your ankles. You shuffle up to a judge in groups of 5, and the judge sentences you to between 30 and 180 days in prison. And a core civic, usually prison, a private prison that will make $125 a day on that you're staying there. And so that sort of consequence delivering system is also a part of prevention through deterrence, right? So what Trump did, like when he was separating families at the border, when agents are pulling like children from their mothers and fathers, that was part of prevention. That was part of that same strategy that's been in place since Clinton in 1994, as Jason De Leon details in his book. And so it's really like, that's what Biden has too. He's doing the prevention through deterrence. You look at the budget, like you look at CBP, when I look at the border immigration budgets And you look at the Clinton 1994 when prevention through deterrence started with Clinton, it was $1.5 billion, the annual budget in 1994. In 2020, it was $25 billion, the annual budget. It's grown every year, year after year, and I believe this year it's even higher. It's like 25 or 26 billion under the Biden administration. So he has a budget that pays for nearly 21,000 Border Patrol agents, up from 4,000 during the Clinton
largest
years.
police force in the United States, right?
Exactly, the largest federal police force. CBP, actually, Customs and Border Protection, which is 60,000, is the largest federal police force. Border Patrol is a part of it, but they also have Air and Marine, which is like an Air Force and the Navy. It's like it's a domestic army, right? That's what it is. They have special forces units, the BORTAC. They're actually Border Patrol, but they're the ones that were in Portland, like snatching people off the streets in Portland. So this is what Biden has at his disposal. He, during his campaign, other candidates were talking about dismantling ICE, dismantling CBP. Biden, no. That's maintained, not cut, not a dollar cut from the budget. This force remains the same. In fact, as we were just discussing, the technologies are going to even increase. So are we going to see a upsurge of the Northrop Grummons, of the Elbit Systems, of the Lockheed Martins, of the Deloitte, getting contracts and then influencing policy? And then even, this is the most, I hate to be so cynical because I'd rather be more hopeful, but you have, a comprehensive immigration reform bill. When that comes to the table, when that's being debated, like you said, it dies in Senate, right? But the way it won't die in the Senate is if all these companies get in there, like they always do. Every time there's a comprehensive immigration reform bill, companies start to lobby like mad. They go in there, they start talking to people. They say, you need this in. So if you look at the 2013 one, the last one that actually passed through Senate, you have all these companies. There's a list, we will buy 14 black helicopters from Lockheed Martin. We'll buy this, all these, there's a list of things that there's, I think, 50 or $45 billion given to border militarization in that 2013 bill that didn't pass. Remarkably, it passed in the Senate first, and then it died in the House.
That's when the House was controlled by the Tea Party, right? That's why it was more. That's when the Senate was more moderate, actually, if you can imagine that, than the House. That's when the House was controlled by. Now I forget his name. He looked like a Snoopy. He was always crying. Boehner. When Boehner was in charge of things. Remember how he was always crying? Yeah. Crying for America because he was so in love with America. He's such an American. He was crying for America.
Yeah, of course.
And everybody, I'm looking forward to the new book. I want to read those other books too. But this Biden's border, it's at your website, toddmiller.com, right?
toddmillerwriter.com.
toddmillerwriter.com. The good thing is, obviously there's a lot, nuts and bolts, figures and statistics. You also give the history, right? You also show this really started, I guess, under Reagan with 1986, right? But really got going under Clinton, right? With the building of the wall and the Operation Safeguard and Gatekeeper and all this stuff. And then you show that every subsequent administration just takes what the preceding administration did and just ratchets it up a little bit, right? Bush did that with Clinton's policy. Obama did that with Bush's policy, and then Trump did that with Obama's policy, right? Obama was, like you mentioned, and people may forget that he was the only president in American history to ever deport nearly 3 million people. Trump didn't come anywhere near that number. But Trump catches hell, and you heard it sometimes, right? When he was putting kids in cages, people were saying, well, Obama built those cages, right? And that's he kind of had that in mind, but he couldn't do that with his base. Now, if a Republican gets in with the infrastructure that a Democrat's built, he can put in kids in cages easily. So in a way, the president of the United States isn't really in charge of anything, isn't really effectual anymore. He isn't like what we used to think of, like FDR or even Lyndon B. Johnson, somebody who can get things done. A modern day U.S. president is really beholden, really works for the system already in place, and his effectiveness is really, he's just a spokesman, right? He's just a salesman for the system. He sells it.
Yeah, I think you put it perfectly. Really, that's what it seems to me.
That's sad, man. That's sad.
Yeah, and honestly, it is sad, and it's exactly what if you look at what Biden's doing, and now we're still at the beginning, and mind you, there could be some great changes. I don't know, but what he's doing is changing the rhetoric, right? The rhetoric, like, oh, what's technology more humane? Oh, so we're painting a prettier picture of what you say, the system, selling the same system, but here's a rosier picture of it. But
it's kind of like what Core Civic did, right? Not changing what they actually do. Let's just make it sound better. Core Civic. Civic sounds people friendly. It's Civic, the people. Core Civic. Oh, Core. It's just and then you look at their business strategy. Oh, we need to have as much enforcement. We need to fill as many prisons, build as many prisons as possible. Deloitte, like you showed, really goes heavily Democratic. But what they do is they're helping people like Core Civic and Geo Group do things like optimizing bed space and optimizing how many people can fit in a prison. That is, and they probably think they're progressive, right? Because they're voting for Democrats, but that's disgusting, right? They're making what Core Civic and Geo Group do more efficient.
Yeah, they're on the same page. They are all, they're the white collar, I guess, part of the prison detention apparatus, that privatized prison detention apparatus. And they're making money off that, right? They're getting big contracts to do just that, optimize, again, like, it's hard to keep, I know it's getting cliche to say Orwellian, but come on, like, optimize the detention capacity. And that's those sorts of words. And I remember one time I met like a Deloitte employee at a border security expo. And if you the border security expos, it's like a yearly event that happens where all like these Homeland Security, CBP, ICE officials go to it, but also industry, like hundreds of companies will go and they'll display their technologies, whatever they're selling. So you go into like a convention hall, and I've been to dozens of these at this point. You go and it's like this cathedral of science fiction where like robots will be like crawling over the rugs and drones will be there, and you can see monitors and show your face with thermal energy, and all these companies will be trying to sell you things. And I remember there's a Deloitte employee that I talked to who was talking about how he was working for CBP. Like, they hired him in a private company to work at their national targeting center. And what he did was look at people coming into the United States from abroad and look for signs like, oh, is there any red flags? And if there were, and it could be just like you went to Syria or you went someplace it could be something that was just, probably most of the cases were something just completely innocent, but he was in charge of busting into your profile, like your Facebook, your Twitter, your Instagram, your whatever, and building a profile about you, and then like developing that, and then have it so like DHS officials could have that on hand, or to determine whether you were a terrorist or not, or determine if you were a threat to the United States or something like that. And that's from the company. I forget what the percentage was, but a very highly, their contributions went to the Democrats, right? It's the same part of the same system of exclusion, of targeting people, profiling people, and that's what I think we're going to, unless there's some sort of, I think with the Biden, this is what we're going to see. We're going to see continuation of this in rosier language, some reversal of the Trump policies. But it's going to be the same thing unless, and this is what I think where I think there is something you can do with this administration as opposed to Trump. Like with Trump, there's just nothing you can do. With Biden and the Biden-Harris administration, there is the Democrats, even though like most of the big ones voted for the Secure Fence Act of 2006, and they voted for a wall, right? They became very visibly anti-wall over the last 4 years, and rhetorically pro-immigrant over the last 4 years. And so and also very sensitive to like what's going on at a grassroots level. Right. They could be pressured. And it seems like this right now, especially during the first 2 years where, you have maybe government power more in the Democrats' hands, it might be a good time for that sort of pressure to say, to like, okay, we got, the whole thing needs to be really just even dismantled, like prevention through deterrence. Why are we still on the strategy that forces people into the desert? Why are all these companies like helping foreign policy and strategy? Why are you buying all these Black Hawk helicopters? Is it a war with Mexico? Like all these questions that are not asked could be asked. And I think there's an opportunity at least for some pressure to be wielded on the Democrats right now.
I mean, the problem is that, most even progressives will say, you might meet somebody like me who doesn't believe in borders, but that's, I'm a radical. I know I'm on the extreme end of it. Even most progressives will agree that the border needs to be secure. They talk in terms of everybody believes in property, right? And they believe America owns its territory and has a right, just like you defend your house, you have a fence around your house. They believe America has a right to have a fence around its house, right? And I don't agree with that, but most people believe that. And so that allows, the security apparatus to go, well, you're saying we need to secure the border, so let's do it smartly. And that's where they sneak in, right? And the other sinister thing about the border security is that, I think you mentioned this too somewhere, that and I've written about this, is destroying Mexico, Central America, has been South America for 100 years, 150 years, right? And now is the major polluter, major carbon emitter in the world, and that is causing climate devastation. And I'm from Honduras, and terrible droughts, coffee productivity is dropping. There's all kinds of things, right? And so they're fleeing to where? Where can they go? America. And yet, so it's like, I've always said, like, America's like burning down its neighbors' houses, and then your neighbor comes to your house and saying, hey, can I stay with you for a while? My house burnt down. And you actually burnt it down. You at least lit the match. And America goes, no, we have no room here. And that's what I have a problem with the border.
Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head, right? And that's the thing about open borders. When we talk about open borders, it's always people that are displaced, that are dispossessed, people who are coming from Honduras. Like, for example, the caravan of some 8,000 people that crossed, that came out of Honduras in January. Many of them saying that they were displaced due to the hurricanes that hit at the end of 2020. And those hurricanes, as every climate scientist was saying, they intensified so rapidly because of the warmer waters in the Caribbean. So you have these hurricanes that just bash the Honduran and Nicaraguan coasts and just cause all this devastation and flooding. And then you have a United States that historically has emitted, if you take Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador combined, 700 times more carbon emissions than those three countries combined since 1900. And so you have a clear culprit, when you think of climate devastation. And we're not even talking about the droughts that you just mentioned. And yet, that isn't discussed at all. And in fact, like, carbon emissions certainly do have an open border policy, right? Greenhouse gas emissions can go over and screw up everything. And then also in the United States, the same corporate, the corporations that we've been discussing, they can cross borders, like mining companies and go to Honduras and Guatemala. Like
profits are borderless. Profit making is borderless.
It's borderless. You can go to a community, you steal their water. Like a mine will use as much water as one family uses an entire year, and poison the water with cyanide to get the precious stones or whatever, the metals. And
Canada's doing a lot of that. I mean, people think that Canada is such this great country, but Canada's doing a lot of terrible, heinous stuff, and especially in Latin America with mining.
Yeah. Canadian mining companies are more than U.S. Right. I think they're huge percentage of Canadian mining companies, and they're going, and that's just one example of
that's just one
extractive. Right?
Never mind how the U.S. government controls these governments. How Honduras is a neo-colony of the United States. How its government, the Honduran government, is completely under the sway, bought and sold by the U.S. government. How it's a puppet government. So when a disaster hits, their government is inept because America made it inept. It's designed to be inept, and so of course they're going to flee, and yet we don't give them asylum. It's awful.
Right. I know nobody knows those histories, right? It's like, oh, people are just, then they're people are arriving at our borders, and
that's all they see.
And there's just nothing, to give any sort of context.
And then you hear that these migrants, these caravans are coming from, places where narcos and drug trafficking. The president of Honduras is one of the biggest narcos in the country. Mm-hmm. His brother, and as if Hondurans like doing drugs and they like selling drugs. No, they're selling to their client, which is America. America is the biggest consumer of drugs and the biggest seller of their guns. So the narcos are selling drugs to America, and the guns that they use to cause the violence in Mexico, Honduras, are made in America. So their problem is completely American made.
It's just completely amazing.
well, let everybody know the title of the book, and I know it comes out the end of March. Like I said, I just bought my pre-order. Can't wait to read it. I love how it started. That you were in southern Arizona and you came across somebody who obviously had crossed the border, was thirsty, and you were helping them, and then all of a sudden you realized, oh wait, I'm helping somebody who, if Border Patrol sees me helping them, I'm going to be in very big trouble. But this is the humane thing to do. This person's thirsty. They're in the desert.
Yeah, it's like that's just naturally you're inclined to help somebody.
What would Jesus do? I'm not a Christian. I'm an atheist. But what would Jesus do? I believe in that, right?
Yeah, it's like if somebody is thirsty and they want, so you give them water, right? And in the case of this person is from Guatemala. He was also lost, right? In the middle, and we were in a very desolate area in the middle of the desert. There's nothing around, and he wondered if he could get a ride. And it's like, normally you just, like, if somebody were lost and disheveled and they needed a ride, that's just like you're saying, it's like almost, it's a universal human value just to give a person a ride, for the love of God, give them a ride. And that's like that, the act of giving, like in the border, if you give somebody a ride from one place to another, that's furthering their presence in the United States according to the law.
You're basically a smuggler.
Exactly. You go under a felony and a smuggling law. So it's a felony criminal attempt to do something that would be like just a normal act of kindness, a universal act of kindness. And so, like, just basically, that sort of thing, and the border is criminalized and somehow accepted to be that way, right? And there's a lot of like humanitarian aid organizations that are challenging those sorts of premises. But
you, premises. I mean, and I know we keep mentioning Orwell, and you said that Orwellian is becoming cliche. Mostly because a lot of people don't read Orwell, so when they say Orwellian, they've just read it somewhere in an article. But if you read Orwell, that especially I'm actually a bigger fan of his nonfiction. I thought he's a way better essayist than a fiction writer. Although some of the memoirs are good, right? But he shows that the system and he's talking about liberalism. Most people don't know that Orwell's criticizing liberalism. He never said anything about Hitler or fascism or anything. He's talking about liberalism, and he's saying that they're going to it's called the atomization, right? Or what Marx calls alienation, right? Making you a person, and you are suspicious of everybody else. Somebody's crossing the desert and they're lost. Oh, I can't. And that's great for the system, right? Divide us and make you not trust your neighbor. That's great for the system. That's great for the system. But thank you so much for coming on, man. Any last words? Any words of hope?
Well, I think there should be. I mean, the thing is like this has all got to change. It's really an unsustainable system. And the book Empire of Borders that I wrote a couple years ago, that book that looked at the expansion of the U.S. border, and it just went into how like there's a global apparatus, and just looking at the apparatus, it was just amazing to look at it and say, oh, this apparatus is in place to keep things as they are, like to keep the rich keep getting richer, the poor keep getting poor, those that make profits keep making profits, and hell be to the people who have the hurricanes or whatever climate catastrophe. Like this contains them and manages like what's this what's going on planet Earth, and it's just really like an unsustainable system that attempts to maintain like this endemic inequality and like environmental catastrophe that's being predicted, as well as endemic racism, right? Yeah. And this thing, it's just unsustainable. Just from a climate perspective, it's just unsustainable. Like the predictions of people being on the move more than ever before by the end of the century than we've ever seen. So we're being forced to recontemplate how everything is organized. And in that sense, I find hope, right? Like when I talk to like kids a lot or students a lot, and it's always talking to students, like you guys are the ones that are going to like, you're going to have to imagine what's coming, right? Yeah. Not me anymore. You guys are the ones that are going to have to like think and these like looking at just borders, these things can't stay. They got to like the militarized divisions that we're talking about, like all the harm they cause. They also cause us like on the inability for people to organize across borders with each other. And that, to me, that's where the solutions lie. When we're like breaking down the borders, we're organizing together. Like in Arizona, Arizonans should be organizing with Sonorans because the same things are hitting both of us, right? That these borders create these divides, exactly what you're just saying. Like you get divided between people, you're unable to organize, and you're unable to organize against the system that keeps it in place. And so that's what I see. It's either going to happen or it's going to be kind of forced to happen. But there's a sort of reorganization that's going to have to happen. This kind of border system is going to burst apart at its seams, and it seems like there already seems to be like grassroots organizing from the ground that really can challenge how this apparatus is, and really start to begin to imagine something new. Because whatever we have now, right, and it's time to begin like making the steps to imagining a new world where, like the Zapatistas say, donde quepan todos, like where everyone fits.
Yeah. I mean, we're headed towards we're slipping into, not even headed towards, we're in it now. We're beginning it. We're slipping into a planetary disaster, catastrophe. And there's only two responses that we can make as a human species, right? Solidarity or selfishness, right? And I fear that with all these stories of, the looming dystopia that we're entering, people are like, oh, secure the border, secure our resources, not mine, in the next 100 years, this is going to be 50% more people and 50% less drinking water. And there's going to be wars for water. So you would think like, okay, we need to get rid of these borders. We need to all work on a global human species Independence Day, the movie kind of scale.
Nah.
Or there's a lot of people who go the other way, right? Like, no, we have to not only secure America's own resources, but I mean, if you're believe in white supremacy, then you're like, oh, definitely we have to. This is not the time to do away with white supremacy. We need to actually reinforce it, and you see a lot of that too. You see a lot of that talk about, but it's ridiculous. Races are like borders, right? We created these divisions between countries, and we created these divisions between people that are imaginary.
Yeah. And that's what exactly what the big border wall is. Like the Trump 30-foot wall is exactly that. It's like these artificial divisions that are just implanted between peoples, and
preventing them from collaborating and working together. Just like racism does, border security does the same thing.
Yeah, and they're part of the same fabric, right?
Yeah,
it's like it's a manifestation of it, right? And yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Todd Miller, for coming on. Journalist, author. Upcoming book is Build Bridges, Not Walls. Love the title. Great title. I believe in that wholeheartedly. Pick up your pre-order. I got mine on Amazon, but it's City Lights. City Lights?
City Lights, yeah.
Nice. Very nice. Thank you so much for coming on. Have a good weekend. Yeah,
thank you. I very, very much appreciate being on. And you too have a great weekend.
Peace, man.